Welcome to Southwest Desert, where adventure meets the arid beauty of the American Southwest. Join us as we explore the rugged landscapes, uncover hidden historical gems, and dive deep into the rich legends and culture of this iconic region. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon so you don't miss out on the latest desert adventures. Please leave a like or comment. This is very helpful. Let's journey together into the heart of the Southwest Desert. Welcome to Southwest Desert, the channel that unearths the extraordinary stories of America's Southwest overlooked pioneers. I'm your host, Alan. Today, we venture into the untamed wilderness of 1820s Arizona, following the footsteps of a young Kentucky adventurer whose courage, ambition, and occasional recklessness would forever inscribe his name in the annals of Western exploration. So, gather around, listeners, as we trace the remarkable journey of this forgotten American adventurer whose published memoir became a national sensation and offered the first written glimpse into a territory that would one day become the American Southwest. This is the tale of James Ohio Patty, the man who walked 2,000 miles of unmapped wilderness, survived imprisonment by Mexican authorities, allegedly saved thousands from a smallpox epidemic, and returned home a broken but unforgettable figure in American history. In 1824, while most Americans were still celebrating the recent victory of Andrew Jackson's election, a restless young man from Kentucky set his sights on the western horizon. James Ohio Patty was barely into his 20s, young, ambitious, and hungry for the adventure and fortune that awaited in the far western territories. What drove him wasn't gold, but something equally precious in the fashionable parlors of Europe and America: beaver fur. Some historians have aptly called it the Beaver Rush. Patty wasn't venturing into this dangerous territory alone. His father, Sylvester Patty, a former soldier in the War of 1812, joined him on this ambitious journey. Together, they left behind the comforts of civilization and headed first to St. Louis and then to Santa Fe, the jumping-off point for their Arizona adventures. Santa Fe, then a part of newly independent Mexico, was a bustling trade hub where American, Mexican, and indigenous cultures collided. It was here that the Pattys joined Sylvester Pratt's trapping party, hoping to secure the necessary permissions to trap in Mexican territory. But their plans faced an immediate obstacle. The Mexican governor refused to grant them a trapping license. It seemed their journey might end before it even began. But as fate would have it, an opportunity for redemption soon presented itself. A Comanche raid on a nearby settlement had resulted in the capture of two women, one of whom was Jacova, the daughter of a former governor. When word reached Santa Fe, Patty and his companions volunteered for the rescue mission. Their success not only saved the women, but earned them the gratitude of influential Mexican officials, and most importantly, the coveted trapping license they sought. By December 1824, Patty's party reached the Gila River, and in January 1825, they became some of the first Americans to enter what we now know as Arizona. The landscape that greeted them was a wilderness paradise. The young trapper's excitement was palpable when he described setting his first traps along a tributary of the Gila River, likely the San Francisco River. The results must have seemed like a dream come true: 30 beavers in the very first catch, followed by another 250 pelts as they worked their way along the river. But this pristine wilderness held dangers as well as riches. One evening, while searching for shelter, Patty entered what he thought was an empty cave, only to come face to face with a massive bear. The terrifying encounter ended with Patty narrowly escaping with his life. and the natural threats paled in comparison to human ones. This was, after all, territory dominated by indigenous tribes fiercely resistant to white encroachment. During this first expedition, Paddy's party suffered a devastating blow when their horses were stolen, likely by Apache warriors. Without horses, the trappers were forced to abandon much of their hard-won fur harvest, though they eventually managed to recover enough to sell for $1,200 upon their return to Santa Fe, a substantial sum for the time, but far less than they had hoped for. By 1826, despite the hardships of his first journey, Paddy was eager to return to the beaver-rich streams of Arizona. This time, he joined a larger and more ambitious expedition led by the experienced French trapper Miguel Robidoux. Their plan was to push beyond the Gila River and reach the Colorado River, a journey deeper into unknown territory than any American expedition had previously attempted. Their party of about 30 men returned to Arizona in January 1826, fighting off multiple Indian attacks as they made their way through what is now the Phoenix area. But it was near the confluence of the Gila and Salt Rivers that they encountered their greatest tragedy. Here, they met a group of Maricopa Indians who invited the trappers to their village. Suspecting treachery, Paddy and his immediate group declined, but Robidoux and several French trappers accepted. In the middle of the night, Paddy's worst fears were realized when the Maricopas attacked, killing most of the French trappers who had entered the village. Only Robidoux himself managed to escape and rejoin Paddy's group. The slaughter might have ended there, but the arrival of another trapping party led by the now legendary mountain man Ewing Young changed the equation. The combined forces launched a retaliatory attack on the Maricopa village. According to Paddy's account, they killed 110 Indians, a number that historians generally consider exaggerated, but which reflects the brutal cycle of violence that characterized the frontier. With revenge exacted, the party continued westward, trapping along the Salt and Verde rivers. The journey became increasingly difficult as they faced hunger, heat, and hostile encounters. When they finally reached the Colorado River near present-day Yuma, they encountered the Yuma Indians. From there, the expedition turned north, following the Colorado River. Their trapping was productive, but they suffered continual attacks from indigenous groups. Near what is now called the Bill Williams River, 3 trappers were killed in one such encounter. The party's exploration was remarkable in its scope. They entered the Grand Canyon and traversed parts of present-day Utah, Colorado, and Nevada. By Paddy's reckoning, they covered more than 2,100 miles of wilderness in just 4 months. When they finally returned to Santa Fe, their haul of furs was worth an estimated $20,000, a fortune at the time. But their triumph was short-lived. The New Mexican governor, Manuel Armijo, confiscated all their furs, claiming their license was invalid. In one cruel stroke, all their sufferings and labor came to nothing. Despite this devastating setback, the lure of the frontier remained strong. By autumn 1827, both James and his father Sylvester joined another Colorado-bound trapping party. This time, they pushed even further west, eventually reaching the mouth of the Colorado River. Along the way, they had pleasant interactions with the Cocopa Indians south of Yuma. Paddy's narrative describes these encounters with unusual warmth, particularly noting his friendly exchanges with native women. At the river's mouth, the party buried their accumulated furs for later retrieval and made the fateful decision to cross the desert to San Diego. This nearly fatal journey across the scorching landscape brought them to the Spanish colonial outpost in early 1828. But San Diego offered no refuge. The Mexican governor of California, José María Echeandía, was deeply suspicious of Americans entering from the east. He accused Paddy's party of being spies, destroyed their passports, and imprisoned the entire group. It was in this dismal prison that Sylvester Patty, who had accompanied his son through all their adventures, fell ill and died. James was devastated, but amid this personal tragedy, a larger crisis emerged that would change his fortune. A smallpox epidemic began sweeping through California, threatening both the Mexican settlements and indigenous communities. In what seems almost too convenient to be true, and which many historians question, Patty claimed to have found a smallpox vaccine among his father's belongings. He offered Governor Iquindia a deal, his freedom in exchange for inoculating the population. According to Patty's narrative, he vaccinated some 22,000 Mexicans and Indians, potentially saving countless lives. Whether this number is accurate or not, the epidemic did subside, and Patty was eventually released. But his trials were far from over. His journey to Mexico City to seek compensation for the unjustly confiscated furs proved fruitless. By early 1830, he finally made it back to Kentucky, penniless, in poor health, and disillusioned with the frontier life that had once called so strongly to him. In 1831, James Ohio Patty collaborated with Reverend Timothy Flint to publish The Personal Narrative of James Ohio Patty of Kentucky. The book became an instant bestseller, captivating an American public hungry for tales of the wild frontier. The narrative is filled with the kind of adventures readers craved: hostile encounters with Indians, near-death experiences with wild animals, desert crossings, imprisonment, and heroic medical interventions. Modern historians debate the accuracy of many of Patty's claims, suggesting that some incidents were likely exaggerated or entirely fabricated. But even with these embellishments, Patty's account holds immense historical value. He was the first American to cross Arizona to the Colorado River and document the journey. His descriptions of the pre-American Southwest provide an invaluable record of a rapidly changing region. What makes Patty's story particularly intriguing is a curious omission in his narrative. He never identifies the leaders of the trapping parties he accompanied except for his father. Later historical research has placed him in the company of famous mountain men like Miguel Robidoux and Ewing Young, suggesting he moved among the most significant figures of the early Western frontier. In the pantheon of mountain men, Patty remains a minor character compared to contemporaries like Kit Carson, Bill Williams, or Ewing Young. Many of these men accomplished more in terms of exploration and trapping success, but few left the detailed written record that Patty did. It is perhaps this quirk of history, that Patty documented what others merely lived, that has preserved his legacy. James Ohio Patty died in obscurity, the date and circumstances of his death unknown. But the legacy of this sun-darkened young man in buckskins, with his fur hat, long rifle, and insatiable wanderlust, lives on in the pages of his narrative and in the history of the American Southwest. Thank you for joining your desert frontiersman Alan for another Southwest story. A lone figure crouches by an icy mountain stream, his weathered hands working deftly to set a beaver trap in the frigid water. The year is 1830, and winter's grip is finally loosening its hold on the Rocky Mountains. The man's face is leathered by sun and wind, his clothes a patchwork of buckskin, wool, and animal fur. In a world before photographs and video, in terrain no white man had mapped, he was carving out a life that would become the stuff of American legend. This is not fiction. This was Bill Williams, preacher turned trapper, white man who lived among Native Americans, guide, scout, horse thief, and ultimately, a man whose name would be forever etched on the landscape of the American West. Imagine growing up in a place where your playground extended to endless horizons, where your friends were the children of indigenous peoples, and where survival skills weren't taught in classrooms but learned through daily necessity. This was the childhood of Bill Williams, born in 1787 in North Carolina, but raised in St. Louis, then the beating heart of America's fur trade and the gateway to the unexplored West. St. Louis in the early 1800s wasn't the metropolitan area we know today. It was a frontier outpost buzzing with trappers, traders, Native Americans, and adventurers, all converging at this last stop before the vast unknown that lay beyond the Mississippi. For young Bill Williams, this environment was formative. Unlike most white children of his era, Williams spent much of his youth playing with Native American children. This immersion wasn't just social, it was educational. He learned their languages, absorbed their customs, and gained an understanding of indigenous perspectives that few white Americans possessed. These early experiences would shape the trajectory of his remarkable life. Now, let's pause and consider the historical context. This was decades before the concept of manifest destiny took hold, before wagon trains of settlers began streaming westward. The Louisiana Purchase of 1803 had just doubled the size of the United States, but most Americans had no conception of what these new territories contained. The men who ventured into these unknown lands were truly at the frontier of human experience. At 17, something unexpected happened in young Bill's life. This teenager, raised in the raucous atmosphere of a frontier town, felt called to become a circuit preacher. Yes, you heard that correctly. Before he became the legendary mountain man, Bill Williams rode from settlement to settlement spreading the gospel. But faith alone couldn't fill his stomach. To supplement his meager earnings as a preacher, Williams turned to skills he'd learned in childhood, hunting and trapping with the Osage people. This duality, the spiritual man and the wilderness survivor, provides a fascinating glimpse into the complex character of Bill Williams. In 1813, at age 26, Williams took an Osage woman as his wife. For the next 12 years, he lived primarily among her people, fathering 2 children and becoming thoroughly integrated into Osage society. This wasn't merely a marriage. It represented a complete cultural immersion that few white Americans experienced. For over a decade, Williams saw the world through the dual perspectives of both his birth culture and his adopted one. Then tragedy struck. Following his wife's untimely death, Williams left the Osage and ventured farther west, beginning the chapter of his life for which he would become most famous, his time as a mountain man. Now, before we follow Williams into the mountains, let's understand what being a mountain man actually meant in early 19th century America. These weren't just outdoorsmen or hunters. They were the equivalent of today's astronauts, venturing into completely unmapped territories, facing extreme dangers and living entirely off their wits and skills. By 1820, John Jacob Astor's American Fur Company had taken the lead in the Western fur trade, competing fiercely with the Hudson Bay Company and others for the lucrative market in animal pelts. These companies needed men willing to risk everything to trap beaver and other fur-bearing animals in the remote Western territories. The trapping season wasn't year-round. It ran in early spring when frozen streams began to thaw until about June, then again from September until winter's freeze set in. During harsh winter months, mountain men like Williams faced a choice: find a good camping spot with plentiful wood and game, free from hostile tribes, or winter at frontier posts or settlements in places like Taos or Santa Fe. Summer brought a completely different experience, the legendary rendezvous. Picture this: hundreds of trappers, traders, and Native Americans converging in an agreed-upon location, creating a temporary village in the wilderness. These rendezvous were part market, part festival, part social gathering. Imagine the scene: buckskin-clad trappers trading their winter's haul of furs, Native Americans bringing supplies and handcrafted goods, professional traders offering tools, weapons, tobacco, and the all-important whiskey. There was an unwritten law at these gatherings: no fighting between indigenous peoples and white trappers. Instead, the rendezvous became a multicultural celebration with dancing, singing, shooting competitions, and horse races. Money flowed freely as trappers, who had spent months in isolation, indulged in revelry until they'd spent everything they'd earned. Then, grub staked by traders for the next season, they would quietly slip away, back into the wilderness to start the cycle anew. In 1825, William's reputation as someone who could move between worlds, white and indigenous, led to a significant opportunity. Congress had authorized the survey and marking of the Santa Fe Trail, and the expedition leader, Major Sibley, hired Williams as guide and interpreter. This role perfectly suited Williams' unique skill set. He would ride ahead of the survey party, laying groundwork for treaties with indigenous peoples, using his linguistic abilities and cultural understanding to negotiate safe passage. This work marked the beginning of Williams' career as a professional guide, a role that would define much of his later life. After completing his work on the Santa Fe Trail, Williams remained briefly in Santa Fe and Taos before fully embracing the mountain man lifestyle. For the next 15 years, Bill Williams became a legendary figure across the Western Territories. From Wyoming to Oregon, California to Arizona, New Mexico to Old Mexico, Williams roamed the wilderness, hunting, trapping, trading, and building a reputation that would outlive him. Now, let's talk about what made Williams stand out even among the extraordinary men who ventured into these territories. Most accounts describe him as eccentric, fiercely independent, and possessed of almost supernatural wilderness skills. He could reportedly read tracks that others couldn't see and predict weather changes that would have meant death to less experienced men. His contemporaries described Williams as tall and lanky, and a peculiar high-pitched voice that earned him nicknames like Old Solitaire, due to his habit of talking to himself while alone in the wilderness. He was known for moving silently through forests, able to approach game without detection, and for his extraordinary marksmanship with the long rifles of the period. By the 1840s, the fur trade that had driven much of the early exploration was collapsing. Beaver hats had fallen out of fashion in eastern cities, and the once teeming beaver populations had been tragically depleted. Mountain men like Williams faced a choice: adapt or perish. Some accounts suggest that Williams, now in his 50s, turned to more questionable pursuits. He reportedly participated in horse-stealing raids into California and Old Mexico, running with desperate men at the edges of frontier law. Whether these accounts are entirely accurate or embellished by later storytellers, they speak to the harsh realities faced by men whose primary livelihood had vanished. Yet this period of Williams' life, controversial as it might be, served an unexpected purpose. His raids and travels made him intimately familiar with the shortest and best routes between various points in the Southwest, knowledge that would soon become invaluable. By the late 1840s, America was changing rapidly. The discovery of gold in California in 1848 triggered one of the largest migrations in American history. Suddenly, thousands of eager gold seekers needed to cross the same wilderness that men like Williams had been navigating for decades. At this crucial historical juncture, the mountain men found a new purpose. Their unparalleled knowledge of Western routes made them the perfect guides for immigrant trains, army expeditions, and government surveys. Bill Williams, now in his 60s, was among those whose wilderness expertise became a prized commodity. Williams guided numerous expeditions during this period, but one of the most notable was his involvement with John C. Fremont's fourth expedition. In 1848, Fremont, an ambitious explorer and political figure, was determined to find a railroad route through the Central Rockies. He hired Williams as a guide, despite warnings about attempting a winter crossing. The expedition ended in disaster. Trapped in deep mountain snow, men and animals began dying of cold and starvation. Williams managed to lead some survivors out, but the expedition was a catastrophic failure. Later, Fremont would attempt to blame Williams for the tragedy, claiming he had deliberately led them astray. Most historians now agree this was Fremont attempting to shift blame from his own poor decision to ignore Williams' warnings about winter travel through the high Rockies. The final chapter of Bill Williams' extraordinary life came in 1849. At age 63, Williams met a fate that befell many mountain men, a violent death in the wilderness he had called home for so long. While camping in what is now northern Colorado, Williams was killed by a band of Ute warriors. The circumstances of his death remain somewhat mysterious and have spawned multiple legends. Some accounts claim the Utes didn't recognize Williams until after they had killed him, and upon realizing who he was, returned to give him a chief's burial at his favorite spot in what is now northern Arizona, at the base of a towering natural rock formation on the slopes of the mountain that would later bear his name. Other historians believe the killing was deliberate. Williams had taken a Ute wife and lived among the tribe for years, but some sources suggest he had betrayed them, either by leading army forces against them or by mishandling trade goods entrusted to him. One particularly colorful account claims he had taken pelts from Ute trappers to sell in Santa Fe, but instead squandered the money on frivolous purchases, including bolts of calico cloth that he unrolled in the streets just to watch local women fight over the fabric. The truth of Williams' final days may never be known with certainty. What is clear is that his life embodied the complexities and contradictions of America's westward expansion, a movement that brought unprecedented opportunity and devastating consequences, often within the same historical moment. Imagine being miles from civilization in the untamed American wilderness. Your ankle has been shattered by a bullet. Gangrene is setting in. Your only chance for survival? A fellow trapper with a hunting knife, a hastily notched blade, and a red-hot gun barrel. Welcome to Southwest Desert, where we uncover the extraordinary stories that shape the American West. I'm your host, Alan, and today we're diving into the remarkable and gruesome tale of how Thomas Smith became known to history as Pegleg. In the annals of frontier history, few figures embody the raw, unvarnished spirit of the American Southwest quite like Thomas Pegleg Smith. Born in 1797 in Kentucky, Smith was a product of the frontier, rugged, resourceful, and not always on the right side of the law. Long before his infamous nickname took hold, young Thomas cut his teeth working Mississippi River flatboats, where he developed the grit and savvy that would later serve him in the untamed territories of the West. The year 1824 marked a turning point for Smith. Leaving behind the relative civilization of the Mississippi, he joined a caravan bound for Santa Fe from St. Louis. This journey would take him into the heart of the American Southwest, where he established himself as a trapper, exploring territories few white men had seen. But Smith's frontier credentials came with a dark underbelly. To understand Pegleg Smith is to confront the brutal realities of frontier expansion. In 1827, Smith participated in what can only be described as a massacre alongside fellow trapper Milton Sublette. Their targets were the Papago people, now recognized as the Tohono O'odham. The violence was devastating. More than 100 indigenous people were killed, including women and children. The attackers reportedly justified this brutality as retaliation for alleged attacks on French trappers. Smith's moral compass continued to falter as he turned to increasingly dubious enterprises. Throughout the 1830s, he kidnapped indigenous children to sell into the Mexican slave trade. Later, he became notorious for horse theft in California, selling his stolen mounts at Bent's Fort for considerable profit. This was the complex and contradictory character of the man, capable of extraordinary survival skills and equally extraordinary cruelty. But it's the winter of 1828 that interests us most, the pivotal moment that would forever change Thomas Smith's identity. During a bitterly cold encampment near the Green River watershed, likely in an area known as Brown's Hole, an incident occurred that would transform Smith from an obscure frontier figure into the legendary Peg Leg. The exact circumstances of Smith's injury are shrouded in historical ambiguity. Over the years, multiple contradictory narratives have circulated, with Smith himself offering various embellished versions, particularly when liquor loosened his tongue. Some accounts describe an honorable combat in a fair fight, while others suggest a treacherous ambush. The weapon varies between a conventional rifle and an indigenous arrow. Even the anatomical details are inconsistent. Some versions place the wound just below the ankle, others directly through the joint, and still others below the knee. What remains consistent across all accounts is the severity of the injury. Smith's bone was completely shattered. In one version, Smith collapsed while trying to reach his weapon. In another, he successfully returned fire and eliminated his attacker. Smith himself vividly described the sensation as feeling like a whole mountain had fell on my left foot, and noted that he was bleeding like a stuck pig. Let's hear Smith's own words about that fateful moment, as recorded in what historians consider one of the most credible early accounts. The ball went plump through my left ankle and smashed the bones into splinters. My companions did what they could for me, but that wasn't much. They held a council and all agreed that mortification would set in, and that would be the end of Thomas Smith. The trappers privately discussed Smith's options. Then Milton Sublette, the same man who had accompanied Smith during the massacre a year earlier, presented the dire situation with frontier bluntness. "Smith, there is one chance for you, and only one. That leg must come off, or you're a dead man before the week is out. And even if we take it off, the chances are against you, especially as we've got to move from here." Smith's response revealed the pragmatic mindset required for frontier survival. "Well, boys, on the plains we've got to decide things mighty quick, and I reckon your judgment is about right. But can any of you perform the operation?" Sublette claimed he could, citing his observations of similar procedures performed by Crow Indians. When Smith asked about his surgical qualifications, Sublette simply stated he had seen it done before. This was frontier medicine at its most basic, not formal training, but observational learning in the harshest of environments. Smith's decision was as swift as it was necessary. "Go ahead, then. It's my duty not to lose a chance." What followed was an extraordinary display of frontier resourcefulness and a testament to human endurance. The trappers, with no medical instruments at their disposal, adapted their hunting tools for this life-saving surgery. A standard hunting knife was meticulously sharpened on stone to create a precision-cutting instrument. A second knife was deliberately notched using a hatchet to create a crude but functional bone saw. A gun barrel was heated to glowing red in the campfire, ready to cauterize the wound. Join my Patreon community and discover my art print products on my website in the links provided in my description. Also, if you would like a particular image from my videos, give the timestamp for image, and I will upload it to my website and Patreon. Thank you. To prepare Smith for this excruciating ordeal, the trappers secured him against a tree to prevent movement during the procedure. His only anesthetic? Approximately 1 pint of whiskey. Despite Smith's general reputation for courage, the fear he experienced was palpable. He described feeling like a drawed skunk, a colorful frontier expression indicating extreme anxiety. Yet in that final moment, determination prevailed. In Smith's own words, "I finally grit my teeth and gave the signal." The procedure itself was as methodical as it was brutal. First, the trappers applied a tourniquet using a green deer hide strip, pulled so tight above Smith's knee that it left a permanent indentation in his flesh. With blood flow restricted, Sublette made the initial incision with the sharpened knife, cutting cleanly to the bone below the knee. The initial cut was tolerated reasonably well, as the tourniquet had already numbed much of Smith's leg. After the flesh was retracted to expose the bone structure, both leg bones were methodically sawed through with the notched knife. The moment the limb was severed, the heated gun barrel was immediately applied to cauterize the wound. Smith's colorful description of this moment has been preserved. "My stump fizzled and smoked worse than a venison steak." The pain was so intense that Smith, who had never before lost consciousness from injury, let out a single powerful scream, reportedly audible from a considerable distance, before mercifully passing out. In the critical post-surgical phase, the trappers demonstrated surprising medical sophistication. They comprehensively bandaged the surgical site and applied a birch bark poultice to the stump. Perhaps most ingenious was their continuous irrigation system. A flask with a punctured bottom was suspended above the wound, providing a constant drip of water to cool the inflammation. Smith remained immobile for more than 2 weeks before the group attempted to travel. Even then, movement was gradual, with frequent dismounting for rest. The physical toll was severe. Smith described himself as "nothing but a skeleton," and noted that it was more than 6 months before I was my own man again. The story of Smith's recovery reveals another dimension of frontier medicine that historians often overlook: the crucial role of indigenous knowledge. Eventually, Smith was transferred to a Ute village for specialized care, where indigenous women applied traditional medicine practices that likely saved his life. They prepared medicinal roots by chewing them into a paste, then applied this directly to the wound site. Even after this intervention, complications arose. A loose bone fragment developed at the amputation site, requiring extraction. In another remarkable display of frontier improvisation, Milton Sublette repurposed a bullet mold as surgical forceps to remove the fragment. Smith's adaptation to his disability became the stuff of legend. He crafted his own prosthetic, a wooden peg leg carved from oak, designed for functionality and easy removal when necessary. This prosthetic would become so central to his identity that Peg Leg permanently replaced Thomas as his primary identifier. The Ute people gave him a new name as well, Wake-Tuko, meaning the man with one foot. Always resourceful, Smith even discovered tactical advantages to his new appendage. In tavern confrontations, which were apparently frequent, he would use his wooden leg as an improvised club. One contemporary account notes that Smith's peg leg proved surprisingly effective during barroom arguments as an unexpected weapon. Smith's final years were as colorful as his early ones. He married multiple indigenous women and eventually settled in northeastern Utah territory. He frequently claimed to have discovered gold deposits, often displaying gold-bearing ore to support his claims. Whether these were legitimate discoveries or elaborate cons remains debated by historians. When Thomas Peg Leg Smith died in 1866, he left behind a legacy that embodied both the resilience and the ruthlessness of America's western expansion. His amputation story, preserved through oral history and early written accounts, provides a rare window into what medical historian Robert F. Karolowitz called the necessary, albeit amateur, medical practices of the frontier in his 1967 book, Doctors of the Old West. What makes Smith's story so compelling isn't just the gruesome details of his impromptu surgery, but what it represents, the extraordinary measures humans will take to survive, the ingenuity born of desperate circumstances, and the complex moral fabric of frontier society. In an era before antiseptics, anesthesia, or antibiotics, a hunting knife, a notched blade, and a red-hot gun barrel saved a life that might otherwise have been lost to history. Thomas Smith's transformation into Pegleg Smith reminds us that our historical frontier heroes were complex, contradictory figures, capable of both tremendous courage and troubling cruelty. Their stories, like the American West itself, resist simple categorization. Thank you for joining your desert frontiersman Alan for another Southwest Gold story. Check out my large catalog of Southwest videos and playlists on historical tales, legends, lost gold stories, and adult bedtime stories. Happy trails. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more great content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.